Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala Ramanaya Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about the third verse of Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam. There is a flow, there's a continuity of ideas from one verse to the next. So I'll just briefly recap on the previous two verses. In verse 1, Bhagavan said, "It is seated as if a hill bereft of awareness. Its action is preeminent, difficult for anyone to know. Though from the very young age bereft of knowledge," that is, before he knew anything else, when he was so young, Aruṇācala shone brightly in awareness as what is exceedingly great. I did not, though it was shining his mind exceedingly great, I did not know its portal, its substance, its reality, its real meaning, even having come to know from someone that it is Tiruvanamalai. When, in chanting my mind, it pulled close, at the opportune time of coming close, I saw as this is Achalam, this is motionless. Here he's talking about his inner experience, about Aruṇācala was always shining his mind as supremely great, and at a certain point, it enchanted his mind and pulled it close. Pulling the mind close implied pulling the mind within. And then he saw it as it actually is, which is as Achalam, as pure motionless being. That is the implication. So how he came to see it as Achalam, he explains in the next verse. When investigating within the mind, who is he who saw is, I saw what remained when he who saw was completely non-existent. The mind did not rise to say, I saw. In what way would the mind rise to say, I did not see? Who has the power to elucidate this speaking when in ancient times you elucidated without speaking? Only to elucidate your nature without speaking, you stood shining as a sky-earth hill. So he ends this verse by referring to the outward form of Aruṇācala, and he explained that the outward form of Aruṇācala is standing there to elucidate its nature, what it actually is, without speaking. So in this third verse, he follows on from this. In this third verse, the subject is about God with form and God without form. So I'll first read the whole verse, and then I'll explain the meaning. The verse is, Ninayan uruvena veniye nanna nilamese malayanam nile ine nidan. Unnuru aruena unnidil vinnok ulahei ulahu alaitarum oruvanai okkum. Unnuru unulara unnida munne urusaru kareyuru enu uruoyum. Eneyan arivura ennuru vere irundane arunavangiriena irundoi. So the first sentence is Nineyan uruvena enie nanda nilamise malayanam nilayane nidan. That means when I approach thinking of you as a form, you yourself have settled as a hill on earth. That implies when I approach you thinking of you as a form, you yourself have settled, standing firmly as a hill on earth. then the next sentence is, Unnuru aruena unnidil vinnoku ulahu aleitarum oruvaneyokum. That means, if one thinks of your form as formless, one is like someone who wanders the world to see the sky. So in the first line, he says that when he thinks of Aruṇācala as a form, he stands as a hill. But if one tries to think of his form, that implies his real nature, as formless, one is like someone who wanders the world to see the sky. I'll explain this in more detail. This is a very, very deep point Bhagavan is making here. Then in the third line, he says, this is very, very beautifully expressed, Unnuru unalara unnida munne uru sarukarai uru eno uru oyum. That means when, without thinking, one thinks deeply of your form, form will cease. That implies one's own form will cease, like a salt doll touching the ocean. And then in the last line is two sentences. The first is, Eneyan aribura ennuru veru edu. That means, when I know myself, what else is my form? That implies, when I know myself, other than you, what else is my form? And then he ends by saying, Irandane Arunavangiri ena irandoi. You who were as the great Aruna hill have been. That's a literal meaning. What that means is, you who were or have been as the great Aruna hill, alone have always been, or it can also mean, alone have remained. Now that my form has dissolved in you, like the salt doll in the ocean, you alone remain. That is the implication. So, as I say, the meaning of this verse is very deep and very subtle. Bhagavan is making some very important points here. So first, in order to understand this, we first need to understand what is the real nature of God. And for that, we are given a beautiful definition in the Taittiriya Upanishad. What is said in the Taittiriya Upanishad is Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. That means reality, awareness, infinite is Brahman. This is the most fundamental and all-encompassing definition of God that is possible, as we can understand by considering the meaning and implication of each of these three words, Satyam, Jnanam, and Anantam. In this context, Satyam means what is real, in the sense of what actually is. So it is synonymous with Sat, being or existence. Since nothing can be other than being, it is Ekam Eva Advaityam, one only without a second, as stated in the Chandogya Upanishad. So insofar as there seem to be many things, being is the one essence of them all. Jnanam means awareness or consciousness in the sense of pure awareness, which is the very nature of being, as Bhagavan points out in verse 23 of Upadesha Undiyya. What he says in verse 23 of Upadesha Undiyya is, Uludu unura unavu verimeyin, uludu unavahum undipara, unave namai ullum undipara. That means, because the literal meaning is, because of the non-being of other awareness, to be aware of what is awareness. Awareness alone is as we. What he means by this is, to be aware of what is, uladu, there must be something that is aware. But what is aware cannot be anything other than what is, because what is other than what is what is not, meaning that there's no such thing. So awareness cannot be other than what is. In other words, since there is awareness of being, being itself must be awareness. Therefore, the very nature of being is to be aware of itself. So anything that is not aware of itself does not actually exist, but merely seems to exist. And it seems to exist only in the view of whatever is aware of its seeming existence. And since being aware of itself means being aware of its own being, being is aware of itself as I am. So only what is aware of itself as I am is what actually is. In other words, it alone is real being. Therefore, since we are aware of our own being as I am, we are not only what is aware, but also what actually is. So after arriving at the logical conclusion of the first sentence of this verse, Uladu Unavahum, what is awareness. In the second sentence, he points out another conclusion, Unave Namai Ulam, awareness alone is as we, thereby implying that as pure awareness, awareness that is aware of nothing other than its own being, I am, we are what actually is. Since there cannot be anything other than being, being includes all things within itself, so it is omnipresent, being immanent in each and everything. However, since being is that from which all particular things derive their being, it is not limited either by any particular thing or by the sum total of all particular things. So it is not only immanent in all particular things, but also transcends them. That is, being is necessarily antecedent to all things, including all limitations, because it is that from which everything derives its being. So being is anantam, endless, limitless, boundless, or infinite. Whereas all particular things are finite, and hence the sum total of all particular things is also finite, being, which is the one underlying reality of all of them, is infinite. All particular things appear and disappear in awareness. So awareness exists whether any of them appear or disappear, and hence it is independent of all of them, including all limitations of any kind whatsoever. Therefore, just as we can logically conclude that being is infinite, we can likewise logically conclude that awareness is infinite. Infinite being awareness is therefore what is called Brahman or God. It is the ultimate source and substance of all things, the ground from which and on which they appear and disappear, like the cinema screen on which streams of pictures appear and disappear. Being infinite, God is formless because forms of all kind are finite. But though he is formless, he is the one reality that underlies and supports the appearance of all forms. However, so long as we rise as ego and thereby mistake ourselves to be a form, namely this body consisting of 5 sheaths, we cannot adequately grasp the infinite nature of God. So to us he seems to be a form, a particular thing of one kind or another, as Bhagavan points out in verse 4 of Ulladu. What he says in verse 4 of Ulladu is, Uruvam Tanayin Uluhu Paramatran. That means if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. That is, so long as we experience ourselves as a form, we will see the world as a multitude of forms, and we will conceive of God as some other form. Uruvum Tanandrel, Uvatrin, Uruvate, Kan Urudel Yavan. If oneself is not a form, who can see their forms? How? How is it possible to see forms if we don't mistake ourselves to be a form? Only when we mistake ourselves to be a form, we see other forms. And then he goes on to ask another rhetorical question, Kannalal Kakshiondo. can the seen be otherwise than the I? And he concludes by saying, Kannadutan antamila kan. That means the I is oneself, the infinite I. I means EYE, the organ of sight, if it is in Tamil is kan. So, even if we believe that God is formless or that he is infinite, our conception of him as such is just a thought or idea, which is a mental form. So through the medium of our finite mind, we cannot know God as the infinite and therefore formless being that he actually is, but can only know him as a form of one kind or another. Even for those who believe that God does not exist, the God whose existence they deny must be a form, a particular thing of one kind or another, because without a finite conception of God, we cannot say either that he is or that he is not. We know the world and God as forms only when we rise and stand as ego, thereby mistaking ourselves to be the form of a body, as we do in waking and dream. But when we do not rise as or stand as ego, as in sleep, we do not know any forms at all, because we are then aware of nothing other than our own being, I am, as Bhagavan points out by saying, Uruvam Tanain, I'll just read the meaning. As Bhagavan points out by saying, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. If oneself is not a form, who can see their forms? How to see any forms at all? In waking and dream, we know forms because we know ourself as a form. Whereas in sleep, we do not know any forms because we do not know ourself as a form. Therefore, the nature of whatever we know or are aware of is determined by the nature of whatever we know ourself, the knower, to be. As Bhagavan implies by asking rhetorically, Kannalal Kakshi Ondo, can the seen be otherwise than the I? Here he uses the word kan, I, as that EYE, as a metonym for what sees, perceives, knows, or experiences, namely awareness. And though alal, a poetic abbreviation of alal, usually means except, besides, or without, he uses it here in the sense of otherwise than, thereby implying of a different nature than. Kakshi means sight, view, or appearance in the sense of what is seen, thereby implying what is seen, perceived, known, or experienced. And undo is an interrogative verb that means is there, but that here implies can it be. So this sentence implies that the nature of whatever is seen, perceived, known, or experienced cannot be otherwise than the nature of what sees, perceives, knows, or experiences it. Therefore, when we seemingly limit ourselves by being aware of ourselves as if we were a form, we will be aware of a myriad of other forms which seem to be other than ourselves, but are actually just a series of mental fabrications, kalpanas, and hence nothing other than ourselves. The I that sees forms is ourself as ego, because ego is what is aware of itself as I am this body. But this is not the real I. The real I is pure awareness, which is infinite and therefore formless. And this is what we actually are. As he implies in the final sentence of this verse, Kannadutan antamila kan. That means the I is oneself, the infinite I. When he says Kannadutan, the I is oneself, what he means by tan, oneself, is ourself as we actually are, which is what is called Atma-vichara, the real nature of ourself. So as we actually are, we as we actually are antamila kan, the infinite I, which is a metaphorical way of saying infinite awareness. This infinite I is not only what we actually are, but also what Aruṇācala, or God, actually is. So it is what Bhagavan refers to as Kannakukan, the eye to the eye, in verse 15 of Śrī Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam. What he says in this verse is a very, very beautiful verse. Kannaku kannai kanindri kanunai kanu vadevapa Aruṇācala. That means Aruṇācala, who can see you, who, being the eye to the eye, sees without eyes. See, that is the end of the prayer, just one word, pa, that means see. Because Antamila Kan, the infinite eye, being the Antamila Kan, the infinite eye, Aruṇācala is eternal and immutable, because whatever comes into being, ceases to be, or is susceptible to change of any kind, is thereby bound within the limits of time and hence is not infinite. Therefore, since Aruṇācala is eternal and immutable awareness, it is the original awareness from which ego not only rises but also borrows its awareness, namely the limited body-bound awareness by which it knows the appearance of forms, objects or phenomena. And hence Bhagavan describes Aruṇācala as Kannaku Kan, the eye to the eye or eye for the eye. The eye, Kan, to which Aruṇācala is the eye, is ego, the finite eye that sees the appearance of finite objects, namely forms of all kinds, both the subtle forms that appear within the mind as mental phenomena and the gross forms that seem to exist outside as physical phenomena. What we as ego see as a multitude of forms or phenomena is what Aruṇācala sees as itself, the one infinite and indivisible space of pure being awareness, Satchit. So though we see what Aruṇācala sees, we do not see it as he sees it. As Bhagavan explains in verse 4 of Ulladu, we see it as a multitude of forms because we see ourselves as the form of this body, whereas Aruṇācala sees it as pure formless awareness because it sees itself as such. This is what Bhagavan implies when he says, Kanindri kanunai, you who see without eyes. To see what actually is, as it actually is, Aruṇācala does not need any eye other than itself, because it sees it just by being it. Whereas to see it as a multitude of forms, we need the body-bound mind eye called ego. Since Aruṇācala is the eye that is pure awareness, it can never be seen as an object, so it can be seen only by being it. Therefore, so long as we rise as ego, we cannot see Aruṇācala as it actually is, as he implies in this verse by asking rhetorically, Kannaku kannai kanindri kanunai, kanu vadeva. That means, who can see you who, being the eye to the eye, sees without eyes? Only by the look of his eye, the eye of grace, will we have the love to look deep within ourselves, to see Aruṇācala shining within us as our own reality. And we will see it thus only by subsiding and thereby becoming one with it, as he points out in verse 8 of Ulladu. What he says in the second sentence of the verse 8 of Ulladu, he defines what is real seeing. What he says is, Ammeporalin unmeil tan unmeyine ondu, odungi ondrudale unmeil kanal. That is, to make sense of that in Tamil, for those who know Tamil, the Ammeporalin unmeil is connected with a dungi. So we have to rearrange the order of words as Ammeporalin unmeil odungi, tan unmeyine ondu, Ondrudale unmeil kanal. That means by investigating or knowing the reality of oneself and by thereby dissolving or subsiding in the reality of that mayporal, that real substance, namely God or Brahman, becoming one with it alone is seeing it. Therefore, since seeing him thus by being him is possible only by the look of his grace, Bhagavan ends this 15th verse of Aksharamlai with a simple one-word prayer, Pa, see, thereby beseeching Aruṇācala to see him in such a way that he is made to see himself as he actually is, namely as Antamila Khan, the infinite eye, which is the eye of pure awareness, the eye to the mind eye. Exactly what he means by the phrase Kannaku Kan, the eye to the eye, is made even more clear by him in verse 5 of Atma-vichara. The meaning of this verse is, in the heart that investigates within, just being as it is without thinking of anything other than itself, Atma, oneself, which is called Annamalai, Aruṇācala, the one portal, the one real substance, which shines as the eye even to the mind eye, which is the eye to all the 5 sense organs beginning with eyes, which illumine those things beginning with space, namely the 5 elements, and as the space even to the mind space will certainly be seen. Grace is also certainly necessary. Be adorned with love. Happiness will certainly appear. Bhagavan's verses are so beautiful. So much deep meaning in them, and expressed in such a beautiful manner. Annamalai is a Tamil name for Aruṇācala, and Annamalai Enanma, which means both Atma, oneself, which is called Annamalai, and Annamalai, myself. So it implies that what is called Annamalai or Aruṇācala is both ourself as we actually are and Bhagavan as he actually is. Moreover, it is Oruporol, the one substance, meaning it's the one real substance, Vastu, the substance that all things ultimately are. It is also what shines as Vinadya Vilakum, Kannadya Porikum, Kannam Manakannaku Kan, which means the eye even to the mind eye, which is the eye to all the 5 sense organs beginning with eyes, which illumine those beginning with space, namely the 5 elements. And also Manavinnakum Vinnai, the space even to the mind space. Manakan, the mind eye, is ego, the seeing or knowing element of the mind, as opposed to all the other elements of the mind, which are objects or phenomena known by ego. It is described as being Kannadya Porikum Kan, the eye to all the sense organs beginning with eye, because it is what perceives the appearance of the world as a picture consisting of 5 kinds of sense impressions, namely sights, sounds, tastes, smells, and tactile sensations, which are impressions fed to it by the 5 sense organs. Since the sense organs are not aware, they do not actually perceive anything. So they are just windows through which ego, the mind eye, perceives the world. Ego perceives the phenomena that constitute both the external world of physical phenomena and the internal world of mental phenomena because it is endowed with awareness. But it derives its awareness from the light of pure awareness. That is, the awareness that is ego is what Bhagavan called Sutarivu, which means transitive awareness. That is, it is an object-knowing awareness. So, as he points out in verse 7 of Uludunapadu, it appears along with phenomena in waking and dream and disappears along with them in sleep. Whereas pure awareness is what he called Sutatrarivu, intransitive awareness, meaning that it does not know objects or phenomena, but only itself, its own being, I am. So it does not either appear or disappear, but shines eternally and without a break, not only in waking and dream, but also in sleep. Since ego is only a temporary awareness, it is not real awareness. whereas pure awareness is permanent and hence real. So pure awareness, intransitive awareness, is fundamental, whereas ego, transitive awareness, is secondary and derived. We cannot be aware of phenomena without being aware, but we can be aware without being aware of any phenomena, as we are in sleep. Therefore, the source from which ego derives its temporary awareness, transitive awareness, is pure awareness, intransitive awareness. And hence, Bhagavan describes pure awareness as manakannakum kan. That is the eye, even to the mind eye. Not only is Aruṇācala manakannakum kan, the eye to even the mind eye, but also manavinnakum vin, the space even to the mind space. The space that Bhagavan refers to in the beginning of the verse, when he says vinyadya vilakum kannadya porikum kannam manakan, that is the mind eye, which is the eye to all the sense organs beginning with eyes, which illumine those beginning with space, namely the five elements, is physical space, what is called Buddhakasha. And since the vast physical space in which all other physical phenomena are contained is just a mental impression, the entire physical space, Buddhakasha, is contained within the mind space, Manakasha. Just as the space perceived in a dream, along with all the phenomena contained in it, is contained within the mind space. However, neither the physical space nor the mind space are real, because it is only in the mind space that physical space seems to exist, and the mind space appears in waking and dream but disappears in sleep. So they are both impermanent and hence finite. The space from which the mind space appears, in which it seems to exist and into which it disappears, is the consciousness space, Chidakasa, the space of pure awareness, which is permanent and infinite, being alone what actually exists. Therefore, Aruṇācala, which is the infinite space of pure awareness, is mana vinnakam vin, the space even to the mind space. That is, the whole physical space is contained in the mind space, the whole mind space is contained in the infinite space of pure awareness. All that I've spoken about so far is just an introduction, because first we need to understand the real nature of what Aruṇācala actually is. Then we can understand what Bhagavan is saying in this verse in context. And we can say, as I'll go on to explain now, Bhagavan exemplified ekabhakti. Ekabhakti means one-pointed bhakti, in his devotion not only to the external form of Aruṇācala, but also to its swarupa, which is infinite being awareness. So, though the real nature of Aruṇācala is, as we've seen above, infinite, formless, that is satyam jnanam anantam, infinite and therefore formless being awareness, we cannot know him as such so long as we rise and stand as ego, because pure awareness can never be an object of awareness, so we can know it only by being it. Though it is what we always actually are, when we rise as ego, we seem to be something else, because as ego we always mistake ourselves to be the form of a body. And as Bhagavan says in verse 4 of Ulunaptu, discussed above, that I discussed earlier, Uruvum tanayin ulhu paramatran. If oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. That is, so long as we mistake ourselves to be the finite form of a body, we cannot know God as infinite being awareness, even though that is what we always actually are. But we can know him, only as a form, because whatever conception or even perception we may have of him is only a mental form, as Bhagavan points out in verse 20 of Ullunaptu, in which he says, seeing God without seeing oneself is seeing just a manomayamam kakshi, that is a mental vision, a mind-formed vision. Even if we consider him to be infinite and therefore formless, that is only an idea, and all ideas or conceptions are just mental forms of phenomena. Therefore, so long as we rise as ego and consequently mistake ourselves to be a finite form, it is appropriate for us to worship and adore God as a form, because whatever form we consider him to be will serve as a focus and support for our love and devotion. As Bhagavan indicates in the first line of this third verse of Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam, Ninayan uruvena eniye nanna nilamise malayanam nilayena nidan. When I approach thinking of you as a form, you yourself have settled standing firmly as a hill on earth. That is, though he says in the second line of the next verse, Irundoli une arivuru arivu urutidaku endre, irutane madam dorum vida vuruvai. That means only to make yourself, who exist and shine, implying exist and shine as the eternal reality, known, you have been as various forms in every creed. That is what he implies by that is only to make yourself, who exist and shine eternally as the sole reality, known to those who fail to recognize you shining in their heart of their own being. You have been appearing as various forms in every mata, creed, or set of religious beliefs. So Bhagavan said, all these diverse forms of God, it's Aruṇācala alone is appearing in all these different forms. Among all the many forms of God, in which God has appeared for the sake of his devotees, the form that attracted Bhagavan, pulling him to itself and thereby transforming him into itself, like a magnet pulling iron towards itself and thereby transforming it into a magnet, is this divine hill called Aruṇācala. Thus, in this first line, Bhagavan indicates the importance of ekabhakti, one-pointed devotion to a single form of God. Focusing our attention, our devotion on one form of God in this way is not disrespecting other forms of God, but is born out of a recognition that since God is one, it is appropriate for us to be devoted to just one of his many forms, while respecting all his other forms as different manifestations of the one form we love the most. That's why Bhagavan says to Aruṇācala, it's you alone who have appeared as all these many different forms, and that is for that is to make yourself known. You have appeared in all these different forms. So when he says it, to make yourself known, this is what he says in the next verse, in the second line of the next verse. Only to make yourself, who exist and shine, known, you have. You've been shining in you've been shining in all these various forms in every creed. He implies that that what he sees as Aruṇācala is what others see as all these other different forms. So essentially all different forms of God are forms of the one God. That is the point he's making there. So since God is one, it's appropriate for us to be devoted to one particular form. So that is why ekabhakti is so important. That's why Krishna also in the Gita, he talks about ekabhakti. And Bhagavan often emphasized the need for ekabhakti. That is, though we recognize that all the different forms are forms of one God, we need to focus our devotion on one form. Every true spiritual path is a journey leading from manyness towards absolute oneness, in which there are no others, because the ultimate reality, Brahman, is one only without a second, ekameva advaitiyam, as taught in the Chandogya Upanishad. So though the path of devotion, bhakti, may begin with the worship of many names and forms of God, it gradually matures into ekabhakti, devotion to one form of God above all others. Whichever form of God becomes the focus of our devotion is called our Ishtadeva, beloved God or favorite God. And as our devotion grows by its grace, our Ishtadeva reveals itself first as our Guru and eventually as Atma-swarupa, the real nature of ourself, meaning ourself as we actually are. Thus our devotion develops from the preliminary stages of Anya Bhakti, devotion to God as someone other than ourselves, to the more advanced stage of Ananya Bhakti, devotion to God as none other, Ananya, than oneself, which is the most mature form of Eka Bhakti, and therefore the best among all forms of Bhakti, as Bhagavan teaches us in verse 8 of Upadesha. What he says in verse 8 of Upadesha is, Anya bhavatin avanahamaham ananya bhavame undipara anaitinamutamum undipara. That means, rather than anya bhava, in this context, that implies meditation on anything other than oneself, particularly meditation on God, as if he were other than oneself. Rather than that, ananya bhava, meditation on nothing other than oneself, in which he is understood to be I, certainly is the best among all. Anaityanamuttamam. Bhagavan very, very clearly says that it is certainly the best among all. Among all implies among all the practices of bhakti. Or it can also mean among all different forms of devotion, all different forms of meditation, but essentially it means among all the practices of bhakti, this ananya bhava is best, that meditating on God as nothing other than oneself. The fruit to be gained by Anya Bhakti, devotion to God as other than oneself, is that eventually by his grace we will gain the clarity to understand that since he is infinite being, nothing can be other than him. So even though we now seem to be a finite person, he is actually our own very being, and hence not anything other than us. He is our own reality, meaning what we actually are. So to know him as he actually is, we need to know ourselves as we actually are. We seem to be something other than him because as ego, the soul or jiva, we identify ourselves with a set of limiting adjuncts, upadhis, namely a body consisting of 5 sheaths. So to know ourselves as we actually are, we need to know ourselves without any adjuncts, which we can do only by attending to ourselves so keenly that we thereby cease to be aware of anything else, including any adjuncts, as Bhagavan points out in verses 24 and 25 of Upadesha. In verse 24, what he says is, Irkumikayal isa jivagal oru porleava undipara upadi unave verundipara. That means by existing nature, God and soul are just one substance. Only adjunct awareness is different. That implies by their being nature, Isa God and Jiva soul are just one porol, one substance or vastu. Only upadi unavu, adjunct awareness, is what makes them seem to be different. And then in the next verse, verse 25, he says, Tane upadi vittu ovadu, tan isun tane unavadam undipara, tanai olivadal undipara. That means knowing oneself without adjuncts is itself knowing God, because of God being what is always shining as oneself. Since God and we are just one substance, paro vastu, namely pure being awareness, satchit, he is what we actually are. So he shines within us eternally as our own being. Since God and we are just one substance, poro or vastu, namely pure being awareness, he is what we actually are. So he shines within us eternally as our own being, our fundamental awareness, I am. Therefore, to meditate on him as he actually is, we need to meditate on nothing other than ourself, which is what Bhagavan means in verse 8 of Upadesha by the term Ananya Bhava, otherless meditation, or meditation on what is not other, thereby implying being self-attentive. So Ananya Bhava is a synonym for Atma-vichara, self-investigation. Whereas attending to anything other than ourself is a mental activity, attending to ourself alone is not a mental activity, but a cessation of all mental activities. Because as Bhagavan indicated in verse 25 of Uludunapadu, the nature of ego is to grasp form, which means to attend to things other than itself. Because without doing so, it cannot rise, stand, or flourish. But if it attends only to itself, it will thereby subside and dissolve back into the source from which it had risen, namely our own being. The more keenly we attend to ourselves, the more we as ego will subside. And to the extent to which we subside, all our mental activity will subside along with us. So by the keenness, intensity, or strength of our self-attentiveness, or Ananya Bhava, we will subside completely and thereby remain in our natural state of just being, which transcends all mental activity, as he points out in verse 9 of Upadesha Undiya. What he says in this verse is, verse 9 is, Bhava balatinal bhavanatita sat bhava tu iritale undipara, parabhakti tattvam undipara. That means by the strength of meditation, being in Sat Bhava, the state of being, which transcends bhavana, alone is parabhakti tattva, the nature, reality, or true state of supreme devotion. In this context, bhava balatinal, by the strength of meditation, implies by the strength of ananya bhava, which Bhagavan extolled in the previous verse, or in other words, by the strength, intensity, firmness, and stability of self-attentiveness. By the intensity of self-attentiveness, we subside and thereby remain firmly established in Sat Bhava, the state of being, which is our natural state of just being as we actually are. Since being as we actually are means being without rising as ego, this state of being, Sat Bhava, is Bhavanatita, which in this context, Bhavanatita means transcending, Bhavana transcending, which in this context implies that it transcends all thinking, imagination, or meditation in the sense of mental activity. Because in the absence of ego, there can be no mental activity. Because mental activity exists only in the view of ego, so obviously without ego, there can't be any mental activity. That's why when the ego subsides in sleep, all mental activity subsides along with it. Since we cannot be in our natural state of just being without ceasing to rise as ego, Satbhava tu irital, being in Satbhava, is the state of complete self-surrender, which is Parabhakti Tattva, the nature, reality, or true state of supreme devotion. Subsiding and thereby being in our natural state of being by means of intense self-attentiveness is therefore the pinnacle of the path of devotion, the culmination of all other practices of devotion. Not only that, it is also the culmination of all other forms of spiritual practice, which are generally classified into 4 groups, namely nishkamya karma, action done without desire for its fruit, bhakti, devotion, yoga, meaning the classical Ashtanga yoga, the 8-limbed yoga expounded by Patanjali in his Yoga Sutra, and jnana, knowledge. As Bhagavan says in verse 10 of Upadesha Undiya, Udita idatil odungi irital adu karmum bhaktium undipara adu yogum jnanamum undipara. That means being having subsided in the place from which one rose, namely Sat-Chit, pure being awareness. That is karma and bhakti, that is yoga and jnana. Since subsiding and being as we actually are by means of self-attention, self-investigation, is the culmination of the path of bhakti, and since Eka Bhakti is central to all but the most superficial forms of bhakti, Bhagavan exemplified Eka Bhakti in his devotion not only to the external form of Aruṇācala, as expressed in this first line of this verse, but also to its Swarupa. Swarupa means its real form, which is the infinite being awareness that shines eternally in our heart as our own being, I am. So all of that all that I talked so far was just to explain to put in context what Bhagavan says in the first line of this verse, namely Neneya Nuruvena Enie Nanna Nilamise Malayanam Nilayanidan. When I approach thinking of you as a form, you settle standing firmly as a hill on earth. So though Aruṇācala is actually formless, so long as we take ourselves to be a form, we can't know him as formless, so we have to approach him as a form. And for Bhagavan, when he approaches him as a form, he stands as a hill on earth. So after having said this, in the second line he says, this is a very, very important point Bhagavan makes in the second line. It's a very subtle point. Unnuru aruena unnidil vinnoku uluhu alaitarum oruvanai okum. That means if one thinks of your form as formless, one is like someone who wanders the world to see the sky. So why is he saying this? Since the real nature of God is formless, why is he saying that to try and think of him as formless is like someone who wanders the world to see the sky? That's a very important point he's making here. Unnuru, your form, here implies the real nature, Swarupa, of Aruṇācala, meaning what it actually is, which is formless. But trying to conceive or know the real nature, real formless nature of Aruṇācala without knowing the real formless nature of ourself is futile, because we can know it only by being it, and we can be it only by ceasing to rise as ego, which we can achieve only by means of keen and intense ananya bhava, meditation on nothing other than ourselves. That is, as this finite and form-bound mind, we cannot adequately conceive the infinite and therefore formless reality called God or Aruṇācala. So his real formless nature, Swarupa, is beyond the range of thought or mental conception. And hence, if we try to think of him as infinite or formless, we'll be thinking only of a mental image, a conception of him, rather than him as he actually is. To illustrate the futility of trying to do so, Bhagavan gives an analogy, saying, Vin no kuru uluhu alaitarum oruvane no okum. That means that is, or one is, like someone who wanders the world to see or look at the sky. The word for sky can mean, the word vin, it means the same as the Sanskrit word akasa, namely both sky and space. So this analogy can be interpreted in two ways, which complement each other. If we take vin in the sense of sky, wandering the world to see the sky implies trying to get nearer to the sky to see it more closely. But though it seems to be touching the distant horizon, no matter how far we wander, it will always seem to be far away. If, on the other hand, we take vin in the sense of space, we do not need to wander anywhere to see it because it is omnipresent and hence always here and now. Likewise, though the infinite and formless nature of God may seem to be far away and out of reach, it is actually eternally present as our own being. So in order to know it as it is, We need not try to think of it, but just need to turn our attention back within to see ourselves as we actually are. Trying to think of it as if it was something other than ourselves is like wandering all over the world, trying to see space, having failed to recognize that space is omnipresent and therefore always closer than the closest. If we take the formless nature of God to be something other than ourselves, we are in effect mistaking the formless to be a form, because otherness exists only in the finite world of forms and not in the formless reality, which is infinite and therefore one only without a second. That is, every form is a limitation, and every limited thing is a form of one kind or another, whereas the formless is boundless and therefore unlimited, so there cannot be anything other than that. What is formless is only Sat Chit, pure being awareness, meaning that it is infinite being, Sat, which is itself infinite awareness, Chit. So it is the one ultimate substance, Pora or Vastu, which is the sole reality underlying the appearance of all forms. Such is the formless nature of God. So it is the reality of ourself, meaning that it is what we always actually are. And hence we can never know it as something other than ourself. We can only know it as our own reality. And in order to know it as to know our own reality, we need to attend to ourselves so keenly that we thereby cease to be aware of anything other than ourself alone. As I explained earlier, attending to anything other than ourself is a mental activity, whereas attending to ourself is a cessation of all mental activity. So being exclusively self-attentive is what Bhagavan describes as thinking without thinking in the third line of this verse. What he says in the third line is, Unnuru unalara unnida munne uru sarukarayuru ena uru oyum. That means when without thinking one thinks of your form, form will cease like a salt doll touching the ocean. Unnuru literally means your form, but here implies your swarupa. So since the swarupa of the real nature of Aruṇācala is Atma-swarupa, the real nature of ourself, meaning ourself as we actually are, we cannot know it or meditate on it as anything other than ourself. So unnuru unalara unnida, when without thinking one thinks deeply of your form, implies when we meditate deeply on our own swarupa, which is the swarupa of Aruṇācala. Attending to and thereby being aware of anything other than ourself is a mental activity, which is what Bhagavan means here by unnal, thinking. So since attending to and thereby being aware of ourself alone is not a mental activity but a state of just being, he describes it metaphorically as unnida, when thinking deeply, or when one thinks deeply, but clarifies that it is not actually thinking by saying unnalara unnida, when thinking deeply without thinking. That is, Bhagavan loves to use this type of expression, thinking without thinking, speaking without speaking. In the 5th verse of Aruṇācala, Ekam Panchakam, he says, he talks about speaking without speaking, referring to Dakshinamurti's teaching in silence. So, speaking without speaking, Bhagavan also often talked about God doing everything without doing anything. So here he's talking about thinking without thinking. That has a very deep and subtle meaning. Therefore, unnuru unnalara unnida, when without thinking one thinks deeply of your form, is a beautifully subtle, clear, and profound description of the state of being so keenly self-attentive that we thereby cease to be aware of anything other than us, self as Atma-swarupa, which is the real form or swarupa of Aruṇācala. If we attend to ourselves so keenly and deeply that we thereby cease thinking of anything else, the result will be munne uru saru kare uru ena uru oyum. Form will cease as a salt doll touching the ocean, thereby implying that our form as ego will cease to exist like a salt doll touching, coming in contact with, joining or immersing in the ocean. Though sakare uru literally means sugar form, in this context it implies a salt doll, because in some Tamil communities, sakare or sarukare, sugar, is used as a polite euphemism for salt. If a doll made of salt tries to know what the ocean is by immersing itself in it, it will thereby dissolve and become one with it. Likewise, when we as ego try to know what we actually are by immersing ourselves in self-attentiveness, we will thereby dissolve back into our swarupa, and thus we will cease to exist as ego and will remain eternally as Atma-swarupa, which is what we always actually are and what Aruṇācala actually is. Uru oyam, form will cease, implies not only that our form as ego will cease to exist, but also that all other forms will cease to exist along with it, because forms seem to exist only in the view of ourself as ego, and hence they will no longer seem to exist when ego ceases. As Bhagavan points out, not only in verse 7 of this Aṣṭakam, in the first line of verse 7, he says, Indraham enu nenevu enil pira ondrum indru. That means if the thought called I, namely ego, does not exist, even one other thing will not exist. And in verse 4 of Ulladu, which we've seen several times before, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. If oneself is not a form, who can see their form and how? But also in verse 26 of Ulladu, what he says in verse 26 of Ulladu is, Ahandayundayan anatmundahum. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Ahandayin indru anatam. If ego does not exist, everything does not exist. Ahandaye yavamam. Ego itself is everything. Adalal yadu idu indru nadale ovadal yavamena or. Therefore, know that investigating what this, namely ego, is alone is giving up everything. So when we dissolve like a salt doll, everything else will dissolve along with us, and the Aruṇācala, the infinite ocean of pure being awareness, alone will remain. And we will be nothing other than that. When a salt doll dissolves in the ocean, it loses its separate existence, its form, by ceasing to be a salt doll. But it, as its substance, thereby remains as one with the ocean, its source. Likewise, when we as ego dissolve back into our own swarupa, we will lose our separate existence, our form, by ceasing to be ego. But by discovering ourselves to be nothing other than swarupa, our source and substance, we will remain as it, as Bhagavan implies by asking rhetorically in the first sentence of the fourth line of this verse, Eneyan arivura ennuru veru edu. That means, when I know myself, what else is my form? Or whatever is my form implies, other than you, what is my form? So long as we rise and stand as ego, we seem to be separate from God or Aruṇācala. But when we know ourselves as we actually are, it will be clear that we are nothing other than Him. In other words, our Swarupa, what we actually are, is just His Swarupa, what He actually is. His Swarupa is the infinite clarity of pure being awareness. So when we know ourselves as that, we as ego will dissolve in that, like a salt doll dissolving in the ocean. However, this does not mean that we become his Swarupa, but that by losing ourselves in it, we discover that it is what we eternally are. Even now, when we seem to have risen as ego and consequently know ourselves as if we were a body, we are actually nothing other than his Swarupa. Therefore, since his Swarupa always knows itself as it actually is, it is only as ego that we seem to not know ourselves as we actually are, namely as his Swarupa. Hence, when we as ego turn our entire attention back within to know ourselves as we actually are, we will be thereby consumed completely by the infinite clarity of pure being awareness, which is Aruṇācala, and hence he alone will remain as one only without a second, Ekameva Advaitiyam. Therefore, it is only by becoming his food in this way that we can know ourselves as we actually are, which alone is knowing him as he actually is, as Bhagavan points out in verse 21 of Uludunapadu. The meaning of this verse is, if one asks what is the truth of many texts that talk of oneself seeing oneself and seeing God, the reply is, since oneself is one, how is oneself to see oneself? If it is not possible for oneself to see oneself, how is oneself to see God? Because God is the real nature of oneself. And then he ends by saying, Unadal Khan. That literally means becoming food is seeing. That implies becoming food to God is seeing both ourself and God. So he starts by asking, what is the truth of the many texts that talk of seeing oneself and seeing God? And he ends by explaining, what is that seeing? It is nothing but becoming food to God. In other words, when we are devoured by him, dissolved in the infinite clarity of pure awareness that he actually is, then only do we know him as he actually is. When we thus become food to him, he alone remains, shining eternally as our own being. So what sees or knows him is he alone. Thus we see him only by being him. Seeing him in any other way is just seeing Manomayamam Kakshi, a mental vision or mind-constituted image, as Bhagavan says in verse 20 of Uludunapadu. When we thus see him as he actually is, namely as our own Swarupa, it will be clear not only that he alone is what has always been, but also that he is what was shining in the form of a great Aruna hill so long as we were rising as ego, thereby mistaking ourselves to be the form of a body. As Bhagavan implies in the final sentence of this verse, Irundane Arunavangiriyena Irundoi. That literally means you who were as the great Aruna hill have been. Being a second person singular past tense form of Iru, which means be, exist, or remain, Irundane means you were, you have been, you remained, or you have remained. So it implies not only that as the one infinite being awareness, Satchit, Aruṇācala is what has always been, even when the devotee rose as ego and thereby did not know him as he actually is, but also that he alone is what has remained, now that the seemingly separate form of the devotee has ceased to exist, like the form of a salt dog dissolving in the ocean. Arunavangiri is a compound that means Aruna Great Hill, or the Great Aruna Hill. Ena means as, and Irundoi is a second person singular pronominal noun formed from Irunda, the past adjective or participle of Iru, be or exist. So it means you who were or you who have been. Thus, Aruna Vangiri Ena Irundoi means you who were as the great Aruna hill, which implies that so long as the devotee rose as ego and thereby did not know him as he actually is, he was what was shining in the form of this great hill, Aruṇācala. Though the real nature of or Swarupa of Aruṇācala is infinite being awareness, Satyam Jnanam Anantam, and therefore devoid of form. So long as we rise and stand as ego, thereby mistaking ourselves to be the form of a body, we cannot know him as the one formless real substance, Parul or Vastu, that he actually is. So any conception we may have of him will be just a mental form. Therefore, to make his infinite and hence formless nature as pure motionless being clear to us by the power of his silence, he stands shining motionlessly in the form of this great Arana hill, as Bhagavan explains in the final line of the previous verse. Vindida dunnile vilakida vendre vintalam machalama vilangida nindrai. Only to elucidate or make your nature clear without speaking, you stood shining at this sky-earth hill. This then is the significance of the outward form of Aruṇācala. Not only does it serve as a focus and anchor for our devotion, but even more importantly, by its divine power of silence, it is motionlessly working within our heart to suffuse our mind with clarity and love, thereby gently pulling us inwards to face ourself, thus enabling us to see ourselves as we actually are. In this way, the silent grace of Aruṇācala ripens our mind and heart, making us fit to become food to be swallowed by the infinite clarity of pure being awareness, Sat-Chit, which is his Swarupa. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala Ramanaya. So this verse is such a beautiful verse, but so deep in meaning.
Michael, this was your commentary is on your blog as you have read it now, or
yes. I just posted it a couple of days ago.
Right. Okay. So people can refresh.
Yeah, they can refresh.
Look into that.
It's the latest article, and now I haven't started writing the fourth verse, so I hope I'll be able to write a similar explanation of the fourth verse, which is also very deep in meaning, before our next meeting, so that I can give a full explanation of it.
So then there may be questions on what you have just been speaking. I suppose initially
Yes, if anyone has any questions about this verse, let's deal with them first, and then we can deal with the question that came by email.
The minds all seem to have been silenced.
Such is the power of Aruṇācala and the power of Bhagavan's words.
So shall I read your...
Yes.
From Bhagavan's teachings, I have learned that I am not the body, nor that the bodily senses are mine. Intellectually, I seem to grasp this knowledge and know that my real being is not limited to the body nor to the senses. Still, the state of the body I am experiencing in this life is causing disease. For many years, arrhythmia of the heart has accompanied me and slowly worsened the heart's condition, causing persistent sensations of dizziness, shortness of breath, and reduced physical capacity. According to the doctors, the time has come for a pacemaker to be implanted, rather sooner than later, stating that the quality of life will significantly improve by doing so. It feels as if I am facing a moral dilemma in deciding whether or not I should undergo the surgery, since I keep hearing Bhagavan's teachings in my head. If my body is not well, what does it matter to me? Let it have its troubles, I don't bother about it, I am free. At the same time, I realize that it is not really my choice whether or not it will be done. It may or may not happen according to my prarabdha. Still, it seems that there is a choice for me to make on short notice. Would you be so kind as to speak a few words on this during the next meeting, please, in Bhagavan's grace?
Yes. as Sadhu Om often used to say, disease comes according to prarabdha, and the medicine also comes according to prarabdha. We may have a condition for which there's no treatment, in which case it's our prarabdha to experience that. We may experience a condition for many, many years, but then a time may come where there's an opportunity is presented to rectify that in some way. So in a case like this, if the doctors recommend a pacemaker, let us take that as Bhagavan's will. But Bhagavan wants us to have maybe to improve the quality of our life for some time. So whatever happens is according to his will. In other words, according to our prarabdha. Because, well, as Bhagavan often used to say, whether we call it prarabdha or call it God's will, it's the same thing, because it is God who has ordained the prarabdha in such a way that is best for us. So, since this opportunity seems to have presented itself, it is perfectly reasonable to avail yourself of this opportunity by undergoing the surgery and having a pacemaker. If it's Bhagavan's will that you should have this pacemaker, it's going to happen. If it's Bhagavan's will that you should not have a pacemaker, even if you decide to have one, something will happen to stop it. So we cannot go wrong. Of course, that doesn't mean we should behave in any way we like. We obviously, our actions have to be guided. We have to act in this world in a moral and ethical manner. We have to try to avoid causing harm to anyone. But we need not worry about when we decide a good thing, like to have undergo surgery for having a pacemaker put. We need not worry about whether this is according to Bhagavan's will or not, because if it were not according to Bhagavan's will, it wouldn't happen. But since the opportunity has come, it seems to be Bhagavan's will that you should have this pacemaker. So the reasonable course of action is to have the pacemaker. And when we undergo surgery, we never know what the outcome is. So we put ourselves in Bhagavan's hands. Bhagavan seems to have presented this opportunity to you to have this pacemaker. Accept the opportunity given by Bhagavan. But whatever be the outcome, you should accept it as Bhagavan's will. Maybe they put the pacemaker and it doesn't work, or maybe it works, or who knows? As Bhagavan in the form of Krishna said in the Gita, you have the right to the action, not to the fruit thereof. So when an opportunity for a seemingly good thing is presented, let us accept that opportunity. Let's embrace the opportunity. But we should do so fully ready to accept whatever may be the consequences. So the chances are, if you have a pacemaker, as the doctors say, it will significantly improve the quality of your life. Maybe that Bhagavan has put you through this ill health for so many years for some good reason. Now maybe he wants to relieve you of that ill health. Whatever happens to us, it's happening by his grace and is therefore for our good. So since he's given this opportunity, accept the opportunity, because the circumstances seem to be pushing you in that direction. So go along with it. And whatever be the outcome, that's his sweet will. I hope that's a clear and useful answer to that question. And I'm sure there may be many people who are in similar situations. I mean, we all, so long as we have a body, the body is susceptible to disease in so many different forms. So sometimes it may seem to be a dilemma, since our ultimate aim is to be free of this false identification I am this body. So whether we should take treatment for these diseases, yes, if the treatment offers it, we shouldn't spend all our life searching for treatment. We should accept whatever is given to us by Bhagavan. But if he gives us the opportunity of having some treatment, let's take that as his will and go along with it. So
And
it
if one
need not
feels
be,
better, if one feels better, it can only help one's sadhana.
yeah. And if
Difficult
one
to do
doesn't feel
sadhana
better,
when
that is what Bhagavan considers best. So whatever happens, there's a beautiful saying in Tamil, Ellam nanmaike. That means all is only for good. Because whatever happens is happening according to his will. And whatever he wills is only good for all concerned. So we use our mind and we say, this is good, that is bad. War is bad, peace is good. Justice is good, injustice is bad. We use all these judgments, value judgments, according to our likes and dislikes. Why do we say war is bad? Because we don't like war. We don't like all the suffering that it causes. Why we say peace is good? Because we like to live in a nice, peaceful, undisturbed way. But ultimately, whatever happens, whether it's war or peace, whether it's health or sickness, life or death, whatever it is, it's all according to his will, and therefore it's for the good of all concerned. So, Elam Nammeke, all is for good. As it's sometimes said in Tamil, under his Arulakshi, under the rule of his grace, nothing can go wrong. Whatever is happening because that is how it is meant to be, and that is what is good for all concerned. Because he is all-knowing, nothing can happen without his knowledge. Because he is all-powerful, nothing can happen without his consent. And because he's all-loving, nothing can happen with his knowledge and with his consent that is not good for all concerned. So that's why Bhagavan says in the 13th paragraph of Nana, when one Parameshwara Shakti, that's divine ruling power, is driving all karyas, making everything happen as it's meant to happen, why should we, instead of yielding ourselves to it, be constantly thinking it's necessary to do like this, it's necessary to do like that? Let's just go with the flow. And Bhagavan gives us an opportunity to have some medical treatment of one kind or another. Okay, that's his will. And whatever be the outcome of that treatment, that's also his will. So our aim is, if we want to summarize Bhagavan's teachings in one word, that one word is subside. Bhagavan's teachings is all about subsiding more and more and more. And we subside by surrendering ourselves to him, accepting whatever happens, it's his will, and going along with it and trying more and more to sink deep within the heart.
Just as an aside, one of Anandamayima's closest and senior sadhus had a pacemaker fitted at quite a late age. It made a huge difference to his life.
Yeah.
It can.
Yeah, it can. It can make a very big difference.
Okay.
Alan G also had a pacemaker fitted, but he had some problems with it. That also happens sometimes. So we can't say, but even though Alan G had some problems with the pacemaker, he probably, having that pacemaker, gave him a better quality of life and extended his life beyond what it would have been otherwise. So all these things, as a general rule, most medical treatments produce good results. They don't always do so, but whatever the result is, that's his will. So we have to accept that. As he said in the Gita, you have a right to the action, not to the fruit thereof. So the appropriate, under these circumstances, the appropriate decision, since the opportunity has been offered, is to decide, yes, let me undergo surgery and have the pacemaker. Whatever be the outcome, that is his sweet will. But the chances are it will be a beneficial outcome.
And I think fitting a pacemaker is not much of an operation. I believe it's fairly simple.
Yeah. Particularly nowadays, because all these things have advanced so much.
Yeah. Yeah. So, should we move to the next question?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So, Michael, all movement happens within self, which is permanent stillness. Is movement, which is the source of ego, not initiated by self?
No. The first movement, the first chalana, is the arising of our self as ego. So movement originates from ego, not ego originates from movement. Ego is Bhagavan is always emphasizing this. As he says in verse 26 of Ulunabdu, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. So all movement occurs only when we rise as ego. So we can't say that that Aruṇācala, who's the motionless, pure, silent being, is the cause of anything. He's beyond cause and effect. The first cause and the cause of causality, the cause of cause and effect, is our rising as ego. So because in the view of Aruṇācala, who's pure awareness, there never was any ego, never was any rising, and therefore never was any movement or any world or mind or anything. This is only in the view of ego. So what has caused the rising of ego? That cannot be said. The reason is, when people used to ask, Bhagavan, why this Maya? Why has ego arisen? He used to say that's a wrong question to ask. First find out whether ego has risen, whether there's any such thing as ego at all. If we investigate ego, we'll find it never actually existed, and therefore that which never existed cannot have a cause. So sometimes Bhagavan used to put it in a humorous way. He used to say, first find that ego and bring it here. Then we can find out how it came into existence. Because he knows if we look for it, we're not going to... Has anyone ever seen ego? Has anyone ever found ego? As he says in verse 17 of Upadesha Manatin uruve maravadu chava manamena mondrile undipara. That is, when one investigates the form of the mind without forgetting, that means when we hold on to that self-attention without forgetting, manamena mondrile, there's no such thing as mind at all. So we seem to be ego. When he says mind in that context, he's referring to ego. We seem to be ego so long as we look at other things, so long as we attend to things other than ourselves. But if we attend to ourselves, there's no such thing as ego to be found. That is how we destroy ego, by seeing ourselves as we actually are. Ego is a false awareness of ourselves as something other than what we actually are. So when we investigate ourselves and become aware of ourselves as we actually are, ego is thereby dissolved, or eradicated or annihilated, whatever we want to say. What that means is we will see that there never was any such thing as ego at all. Even that is not quite true, because what we see is that we alone always are as we are without ever undergoing any change. Therefore, there's no such thing as ego. I hope that was an adequate answer to that question.
Okay, now this is actually our last question. So you'll have time to sprint up and down the heather.
Yes.
Is this Bhagavan, this is Sanjay.
Yes.
Is this Bhagavan explaining Dakshinamurti's stotra? It's quite a short question.
In this verse, he doesn't make any explicit, there's no implicit reference to Dakshinamurti. In the previous verse, verse 2, he said, in the third line of the second verse, he said, wait a second, who has the power to elucidate this by speaking, when in ancient times even you elucidated it without speaking? That is an indirect reference to Dakshinamurti. Because Dakshinamurti is the Adi Guru, the original Guru. He's Lord Shiva in the form of a 16-year-old boy as the original Guru. I spoke about this during our last meeting. So this, when Bhagavan says, who has the power to elucidate this by speaking, when in ancient times you elucidated it without speaking, what he meant when he said, when in ancient times you elucidated it without speaking, that's a reference to Dakshinamurti. So Dakshinamurti is a form of Shiva, Aruṇācala is a form of Shiva, so they're the same. And that same, it's very significant. Dakshinamurti is always described as a 16-year-old boy sitting under a banyan tree facing southwards. The significance of facing southwards is that south is considered as Yamadisa, it's the direction of death. So Dakshinamurti, by bestowing jnana, conquers death. So he's facing southwards, that means he's conquering Yama. Bhagavan, at the age of 16, conquered death and came to Aruṇācala. And he finally settled where? On the south side of Aruṇācala. In every Shiva temple in South India, on the south side of the Mūlasthanam, there's an image of Dakshinamurti. So since Aruṇācala is the Adi Linga Sarupa, the original Linga form of Shiva is Aruṇācala. On the south side of Aruṇācala, there's a Dakshinamurti temple. It's very rare to find a temple dedicated just to Dakshinamurti temple, but there is a Dakshinamurti temple on the south side of Aruṇācala, which is just a little to one side of the gate of Ramanashram. So Bhagavan himself, who came as a 16-year-old boy to assume the throne of Dakshinamurti as the Adi Guru, he came and he settled on that south side of Aruṇācala, just beside the Dakshinamurti shrine. So Bhagavan is Dakshinamurti himself. Aruṇācala took the human form of Bhagavan in order to give us these teachings. So Shiva, Aruṇācala, Dakshinamurti, Bhagavan Ramana, all are one.
Sir, actually, that was meant to be a joke, because after your talk, there was a silence.
Oh, okay, okay.
I then said, is it the Dakshinamurti, is it Bhagwan explaining the Dakshinamurti Shrotra?
Right.
I was making it a joke, sir.
Okay.
But I'll take it an opportunity to ask you, sir, to request you, what incident was that? Then when Bhagwan was asked to talk about Dakshinamurti Shrotra, he kept silent for a while, about few hours, and then he said this was a Shrota. Now this is what it is all about.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've forgotten about that incident, yes.
Yeah,
But Bhagavan also sometimes told the story of Dakshinamurti. But Bhagavan told it with a difference. In all the Puranas it's told, but he's just said Dakshinamurti taught in silence, and he removed the ajnana of Sanakadi rishis. But Bhagavan said that when the Sanakadi rishis approached approached Dakshinamurti, they first started asking questions. And out of his great Vatsalya, his fatherly compassion for them, he answered their questions. And for a year, he went on answering their questions. And for every answer he gave, they asked a very appropriate follow-up question. So the questioning and answering was going deeper and deeper and deeper. But finally, Dakshinamurti understood that so long as he continues answering their questions, there'll be no end to their ajnana. So finally, Bhagavan described it, he said he suppressed that valve of, he closed that valve of compassion which was surging up in his heart, and he merged back into his silent being. And as soon as he merged, they merged along with him. So ultimately, it is only by silence that the truth can be revealed. But the teaching in words has an important role to play, because in order to merge back into that silence, we have to turn within. So because our minds are outward facing, it's necessary for our own being, our own reality, to appear outwardly in the form of Bhagavan Ramana in order to tell us to turn within. But Bhagavan used words. The words are not, as Bhagavan said, words are not the perfect way of conveying the truth. Bhagavan put it very nicely. He said, from silence, which is pure being, rises ego. From ego come thoughts. From thoughts come words. So words are the great-grandson of silence. So the power of words is limited. So what enables us to understand Bhagavan's words correctly is the power of his silence. Without that power of his silence, we will not be able to understand the real significance of his words. So even though he teaches in words, the power behind those words is the power of his silence. So silence ultimately alone will reveal the truth. Why? Because silence itself is the truth. Silence means being, just being without rising, being achala, not rising as ego. That is silence. So that alone can reveal itself. So what Bhagavan has explained about Dakshinamurti is very, very, it's very, very deep. That is, Bhagavan has given a much deeper understanding of the significance of Dakshinamurti. And he taught us that by being that.
So what questions were asked by those rishis to Dakshinamurti? Any idea?
You have to ask Bhagavan, because he's Dakshinamurti, he alone can say. All he said is they asked their questions were very, very pertinent, very deep questions. And for every answer he gave, they followed up with they were following a sequence they asked questions, suitable follow-up questions to get deeper and deeper into the subject. Sometimes you see, for example, if we read books like Talks or Day by Day, we will see people come and ask Bhagavan a question. Bhagavan will give a nice answer, but instead of questioning Bhagavan further, they jump on and ask the second question on the list and then the third question on the list. Where the Sanakadi rishis were not like that. They were highly mature. So they hadn't come with a list of questions, but so each question was an appropriate response to the answer they'd received from the previous question. That's how we should question the Guru. We should draw deeper and deeper explanations by paying close attention. Sravana, hearing, is not an ordinary thing. When we talk of Sravana, listening to the words of Guru, hearing the words of Guru, that means we have to pay very, very close attention to the words of Guru, understand what he's saying, and if we want any clarification, we need to ask an appropriate follow-up question. That's what the Sanakadi rishis were doing. So because they were the perfect disciples, they asked the perfect questions, they got the perfect answers. But finally, Dakshinamurti understood enough is enough. You can never remove ignorance by words. Ultimately, silence alone will remove the ignorance. So he subsided back into himself. He suppressed the compassion that was welling up in his heart, merged back into himself, and by his merging, they also merged. So the way Bhagavan told the story is very, very deep and significant.
So when you were with Sadhu Om, were you doing the translation work the whole day, or were you sitting in silence for a while together or something like that?
We weren't doing it the whole day, but a lot. I mean, it wasn't only translation work. He spent a lot of time editing the works of Muruganar. And that often meant cutting pieces of paper, pasting them, and arranging in order and everything. So we were doing things like that. And while he was doing that, he would often explain to me the meaning of Muruganar's verses. It was, we were just, and then people would come, visitors would come and ask questions. But the visitors were not just people coming for spiritual things. Sometimes a builder would come and ask for advice, and he would attend to the builder. Sometimes children will come and want to play. He'll attend to the children. So he lived a very, very simple, unassuming life. He used to tell me, whatever work comes, that is the work given by Bhagavan at that time. So we shouldn't consider this work is more important than that. When no disturbance comes, he'll be attending to Muruganar's work or something. But when some disturbance comes, okay, that's it, Bhagavan's will, but you should attend to that. So Sadhu Om, I learned from Sadhu Om, not only from all the wonderful answers to my never-ending stream of questions, but also from his example, how he lived his life.
So this paramount importance of self-attention is over now in the mountain path.
Yes.
Do you have more of rough notes, or your rough notes are also over?
Well, what is there is more than my rough notes. I built on those rough notes. Those rough notes acted as reminders to me of the type of answers that he gave.
They are very rich, sir. We are discussing one paragraph now from the very beginning. Finding it, it has got rich ideas are there. Whatever you have discussed in that paramount,
Yes.
It needs this closer reading, I believe.
Yeah.
Like we are doing it one paragraph per day.
Yes.
Every day we are doing that from the very beginning.
Right.
But sir, one complaint now the mountain path has become useless for us. No paramount importance. So nothing there. Nothing there for us.
Complain to Bhagavan then. Nothing to do with me.
Yeah, because absolutely nothing there. I'm saying you, not a single line I can accept that there are their calendar available. That is all.
Right.
More than that information, I don't have anything to do there.
Anyway, it all happens according to his will, so let's not worry about any of these things.
Yeah.
There's plenty of back issues as well.
Huh?
There are plenty of back issues.
Yeah, back
issues. Years and
now
years
there's more than 60 years of back issues, I think.
Yeah.
And they're on the ashram website. You can download all of them.
Yeah. No. What I was trying to say is the only thing valuable in that was the paramount importance of self-attention. And that is already available. That Michael has shared with me. So I don't have to go to the old issues now.
Yeah, that was your view, but other people may have other views. Other people may find other things useful there. So it's all, Bhagavan gives everyone what they need when they need it.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
We've got a follow-up to the first question that came after the email question.
Yes.
He says, how does ego come into existence without movement?
It's coming into existence is the first movement. But we shouldn't look for a cause for ego, because ego is the first cause. Cause, and when Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Śrī Aruṇācala, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. That everything includes cause and effect. So that there is no cause prior to ego. Ego is the first cause, the cause of everything. But if we investigate this ego, we'll find there's no such thing. And since there's no cause, there are no effects. There is only Aruṇācala as pure being. Aruṇācala Ramana as pure being. Pure being awareness, Satchit. Satyam Jnanam Anantam. Infinite being awareness.
So the next question, Michael, did Bhagavan speak about a time period where everyone would become more spiritually aware? It seems that there's so much discussion of that these days in all paths. So wondering if Ramana said anything about it as well.
I don't think specifically. That is, in the Puranas, they talk about the four yugas. And now we're in the early stages of the Kali Yuga. Things are going to get a lot worse, according to that. But I think a lot of these things have a symbolic rather than a literal meaning. But for Bhagavan, time itself was unreal. So Bhagavan won't talk much about these sort of things. The thing is, the world, from our perspective, the world seems to be an imperfect place. It has always been imperfect. Even in the earlier yugas, we hear about these demons, and the gods had to come and destroy the demons. So the world, all this teaches us, this world is never a perfect place. It is a battleground between good and evil. But the real battleground is not the external world, the internal, inside ourselves. There's a battle going on in our own heart between our Vishaya vasanas, our liking to go outwards to seek happiness in external phenomena, and the Sat vasana, the love to turn within and subside back into our being, and thereby be as we actually are. That is but Bhagavan says explicitly in Guru Vachaka Kovai, the significance of all these different Puranic stories of the Devasura Yuddha, the battle between the Devas and the Asuras, the gods and the demons. It is all signifies the battle that is going on in the heart of every devotee, between the outgoing vasanas and the love to turn back within. So the Puranas are all essentially Vedantic texts. They're teaching the truths of Vedanta in the form of stories. So it's some people take the Puranas to be literal truth. If they want to take it like that, that's also one way of taking it. But a deeper way of seeing it, all these Puranas, they have tattva, they have significance. They're teaching eternal truths. So some people object to referring to the Puranas as mythology, because they think mythology is just mythology. They take it to imply what is false. But actually, mythology is a very powerful way of teaching, very deep truths. So the Puranas there's a wealth of spiritual teachings contained in the older the Puranas are the Ityasas, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And the Puranas are a follow-on from that. It's in the same type of thing. So through stories, they're teaching very, very important spiritual and moral, ethical lessons. So all these things about these different yugas, if we want, we can take it literally true. If we want, we can understand it as having a symbolic significance rather than a literal significance. And symbolic significance is always deeper than the literal significance.
In fact, you find the village people, they tune in very much to these Puranas and these,
Yeah.
they have
But
shows, and it really sinks home to them because
Yes.
they're not intellectual, as a lot of them.
Yes. But the wonderful thing about these Ityasas and Puranas, they contain teachings at many different levels. So there's something for everyone in these stories. The same stories can be understood in different ways. So it's, I used to hear, Sadhu Om was a wonderful storyteller. He used to tell the stories of Mahabharata, Ramayana, and so many other stories of saints and everything. But how he would tell the same story, he would tell according to the person he was talking to. Like, I often used to hear him telling the stories of Mahabharata and Ramayana to children. And he would enact it in a very way, and they'd be fascinated by the way he'd bring the stories alive. But then after telling the children, he would then tell the same story to me and draw out a much deeper meaning. So all these it's true of Vedanta itself. Vedanta, the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra and the Bhagavad Gita, why have they been interpreted in so many different ways? Can we say one interpretation is correct and all others are wrong? No. They're designed to be interpreted in different ways to suit the spiritual needs of different people. When Yogananda, this is recorded in talks, when Yogananda asked Bhagavan what teaching should be given for the uplift of the masses, Bhagavan said, teaching cannot be given en masse. Teaching is according to the taught. So the same Upanishads, the same Bhagavad Gita, the same Brahma Sutra, the same Puranas, the same Ityasas, they can be understood in many different ways. So we can't say one interpretation is wrong, right, and the others are wrong. There are different levels of interpretation. So some interpretations are more superficial, some are deeper, but both are appropriate in different contexts.
So, next question. I wonder whether part of the purpose of the teachings is a kind of bewilderment, as we saw as you finished your speech, and there were no questions. Seeing as the mind is so overactive, perhaps it takes this kind of stun effect from the most profound teachings to slow us down, so we may see things more clearly beyond the blur of overthinking. It certainly felt like that for me as you finished, but on a deeper level, what Bhagavan communicates seems to resonate not just in a mental sense, but maybe more as a heart recognition. First, though, the mind needs to somewhat subside through a kind, useful bewilderment that the heart gets a look in.
Yes. I think the real aim of all the teachings is clarity. But in order to get clarity, we first need to in order to get knowledge, we first need to recognize our ignorance. If we think we know everything, we're never going to learn anything. So the first thing we learn from Bhagavan's teachings is how ignorant we are. All our knowledge is based on that who is the knower of all knowledge? It is ego. And ego itself is ignorance, because ego is the false awareness, I am this body, which is not real. It's not true. We are not this body, but in the view of ourselves as ego, we seem to be this body. So that is ajnana. So we first need to recognize our ajnana, our ignorance, and then only we can know ourselves. We can begin to investigate to find out what we actually are. If we say, oh, why do I need this? Who am I? I know who I am. I'm Joe Bloggs, I'm Michael James, I'm this person, that person. Now, what else is there to know? If we think like that, we're never going to go deep in this. We need to first recognize, but we are not what we seem to be. So I wouldn't call that bewilderment, but we need to recognize how dense our ignorance is. And only when we recognize that, then we will, with true sincerity and with true love in our heart, seek to know the real knowledge. The real knowledge being what we actually are. The pure awareness of being Satchit.
Namaskaram, Michael. Just trying to draw a parallel here. Dakshinamurti is depicted as a 16-year-old Adi Guru, and Bhagavan had this death experience and came to Tiruvannamalai at 16. Is there a significance to 16?
16 is considered as a number of Purnatvam. Purnatvam means fullness, because the full moon is on the 16th. The 16th moon is a full moon. So 16 is considered as a number of fullness. So yes, it is significant. Twice of 16 is 32. It is believed Shankara lived up to the age of 32. It is believed Jesus lived up to the age of 32. In Bhagavan's life, he had his first death experience when that fear of death came and the ego was annihilated. At that time, the ego was annihilated. Bhagavan said later, the body was actually dead for about 20 minutes until the life came back, because that body had a mission. So the life came back to that body. In all the early biographies, Self-Realization and other biographies, they wrote about Bhagavan's second death experience in 1912. At that time, Bhagavan was 32, which is twice 16. At that time, he was returning after having, he and Parani Swami, they had gone to Pachaman temple on the northeast edge of the hill. There's a temple called Pachaman temple, and there's a tank there. So they had gone there, they had an oil bath, and they had bathed in the water, and then they were on their way back to Virupakshi cave, and when they came near a rock called Amaiparai, the tortoise rock, Bhagavan leaned against the rock and his body became lifeless. And Parani Swami, seeing Bhagavan's lifeless body there, he embraced him and started weeping. And after about 20 minutes, the life came back to the body. So in Self-Realization, B.V. Narasimha Swami recorded that, as Bhagavan's second death experience. So for many years, people were believing that was Bhagavan's second death experience. But towards the end of his life, Bhagavan said that wasn't actually the second death experience. It was the final death experience. He said many times between that first time, when the ego was annihilated and the body became lifeless, he said many times after that, in the next 16 years, up to the age of this final one on Ame-Parai, his body became lifeless for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and suddenly it would come back to life. Nobody had ever noticed that because it happened without anyone noticing. Only time it was noticed was this time when Swami was with him, and Swami saw it. So Bhagavan said, what is recorded as the second death experience is actually the last death experience. It stopped at that time. So, I mean, what is the significance of these things? We can't say, but it is interesting that the first death experience happened at 16 and the last one happened 16 years later. So 16, as I say, it's a number of fullness. So it does have its significance, but because that is, what is the significance, we can't exactly say, but what we can say is Bhagavan represents that fullness, which is signified by the number 16. As Dakshinamurti also represented that fullness.
So this is looks like the last question here. This is referring to the earlier question that we had. Did Bhagavan speak about a time period when everyone would become, etc.? So they say, decades back, very few spoke about spirituality openly in the West. So it does seem some sort of awakening seems to be going on in some ways. Or is this just ego trying something different to keep us attached?
This world is under constant flux. In many ways, we can say the world's in a particularly bad condition now. We see so much the rise of the far right and authoritarian governments and the old world order breaking down and everything. So in many ways, we can say it's bad. But usually when you have more bad, you also have more good. So but these things fluctuate. If this world were always a perfect place from our point of view, if we had everything, if we had health and everyone had sufficient wealth and life wasn't difficult, there'd be less impetus for this spiritual path. The more defective the world seems from our point of view, the more injustice we see, the more inequality, all these things, these spur us all the more to find the reality behind all this seemingly defective world. Actually, the world is not defective. The world is just as it's meant to be. But from our point of view, because we have certain likes and dislikes, we say this is good, that is bad. So we see many things happening in the world today, so much. We see wars, we see injustices, we see huge wealth inequality. People with $500 billion. He said Elon Musk now, he's the first in history, first half trillionaire. And he'll probably be a trillionaire within a few years. Beside that, we see so much poverty in the world. The richer the rich become, the poorer the poor become. So this world is full of injustices but this is all how it is meant to be. Because if the world was, from our point of view, a seemingly perfect place, we would be lulled into a false security. The fact is, this world is samsara. Embodied existence, samsara means embodied existence. Embodied existence is inherently defective, because what we actually are is infinite being, awareness, happiness, infinite Satchidananda. That's our real nature. By rising as ego, we mistake ourselves to be this body, so we limit our existence. We're here for some 70, 80, 90, 100 years at most. So we're limited in time, we're limited in space. I'm here, not there. So we impose so many limitations on our being, on our awareness, on our happiness, and everything. So so long as we experience ourselves as limited, we are dissatisfied. And nothing is going to satisfy us. Even if we were in the highest heaven, in Brahmaloka or somewhere, we would still be dissatisfied, because being embodied, being limited, is inherently unsatisfactory. So this world is not meant to be a perfect place. So there's all sorts of, there always have been injustices, cruelty, inequality, so many things, because this world is karma bhumi. It's a place where we come to do karmas and to experience the fruit of our old karmas, until we wake up and start to seek liberation. So let's not look outwards at the condition of the world, either to see all the evil in the world or good in the world. Good and evil are a pair of opposites. We need to go beyond all these pairs of opposites. As Bhagavan says in verse 9 of Ulludu Napadu, he uses two words in Tamil, mupadi and irritagal. Irritagal, mupadigal, is how he already puts it. Irritagal, that means dvandva, what in Sanskrit is called dvandva. That's pairs of opposites. Good and bad, knowledge and ignorance, existence and non-existence, life and death, happiness and unhappiness. These are all pairs of opposites. And mupadi is what in Sanskrit is called triputi. That is the three factors of any objective knowledge: the knower, about the object that is known, and the means of knowing it. So I see a computer screen. I is the knower, the computer screen is what is known, and seeing is the means by which I know it. So that's called a triputi. So Bhagavan says, wait a second, I'll just get the verse, get to say it exactly. In translation, we usually translate the irritagal, mupadigal as dyads and triads, just for simplicity's sake. But the dyads means pairs of opposites. The triads means the knower, the knowing, and the means of, the knower, the known, and the means of knowing. So what he says is, dyads and triads always exist they exist always holding one thing. He doesn't say what that one thing is. He just says Ondru. But he clarified that what he means by that one thing is ego, because all these dyads and triads exist only in the view of ego. So he said dyads and triads always exist holding one thing, namely ego. If one sees within the mind what that one thing is, they will slip off. What does he mean by that? So long as we're looking outwards, we see all these dyads and triads. But if we look within to who is the root of this dyads and triads, so who is the base of these dyads and triads, it's ego. So if we look within the mind to see what this ego is, ego will subside, and therefore the dyads and triads will subside along with it. That's why he says, if one sees within the mind what that one thing is, they will slip off. And then he says, only those who have seen the reality. That means only those who have seen the non-existence of the dyads and triads, and the one thing that they hold on to, namely ego, are those who have seen the reality. They will not be confused. Kalangare, Khan, see. So the dyads and triads, they exist only in the view of ego. It's only for ego, but there's life and death, existence and non-existence, happiness and misery, knowledge and ignorance, Chaitana and Jada, that is what things that are aware and things that are not aware. All these different pairs of opposites, they exist only in the view of ego. And among the triad, ego is the knower. Everything else is things known by ego. And in order to know anything other than itself, there must be a means of knowing, whether seeing or hearing or logically reasoning or coming to know through testimony by reading the newspapers or looking on the internet. So there's so many means by which we know things. But whatever it is, there's so many things we know and so many means to know them. But the knower is always ego. So ego is the one basis of the dyads and triads. If we investigate what this ego is, ego will subside, the dyads and triads will slip off. So all this good and evil, different yugas, different good times and bad times, these are all, they all exist only in the view of ego. That's why Bhagavan didn't attach much importance to these things. Sometimes if people raised questions about these things, Bhagavan would explain the symbolic significance of it, what these things actually signify. But generally, he didn't attach much importance to this because Bhagavan was concerned about one thing and one thing alone. The root of all these things is ego. How to get rid of ego? We seem to be ego so long as we're attending to all these other things. But if we look within to see, who am I? What is this ego that knows all these things? This ego will subside and everything else will come to an end along with it. That's why he says in verse 26 of Aruṇācala, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego is not, everything is not. Ego itself is everything. Therefore, investigating what it is giving up everything. Because if we investigate what ego is, ego will subside and dissolve back into its source. When ego ceases to exist, everything else will cease to exist. And what then remains, that alone is the reality. That alone is what we actually are.
In fact, it's quite noticeable that Bhagavan, in his last years, partition took place when hundreds of thousands of people were getting murdered in the north of India.
Not just hundreds of thousands, I believe it was millions died in those few weeks after, a few months after the partition.
And yet, if you read what is reported about Bhagavan's talks, you don't really see anything mentioned.
Yeah. Bhagavan lived through the two great wars, the First World War and Second World War. All these things were happening. And of course, people around Bhagavan, they were concerned about these things. People raised all these questions about all these things. Once someone, shortly before the outbreak of the Second World War, someone asked Bhagavan, Bhagavan, people have so many opinions about the present condition of the world. Some people say we're at the dawn of a bright new era. Some people say the world is going down into a very, very terrible condition. What is your opinion about this? And Bhagavan said, one Parameshwara Shakti, one great divine power is driving all these things. Who cares for your opinion or my opinion? That is so humble is Bhagavan. He himself is that Parameshwara Shakti, but he says, who cares for your opinion or my opinion? This is the nature of the world. Wars have been happening from time immemorial. People have been killing each other different communities, different religions, different nations, different, that is, the mind creates differences. So long as there's a mind, there will be innumerable differences. The root of all differences, the root of all beta, the root of all conflict is our rising as ego. Put an end to the rising of ego, and all conflict, all everything will come to an end. And what alone actually is, eternally, unchangingly, ever actual, ever silent, that alone will remain. That is what we actually are. That is what Bhagavan actually is. That is what Aruṇācala actually is. That is what every God actually is. What everything actually is just that Satyam Jnanam Anantam, pure being, pure awareness, and infinite.
Somebody who put in a couple of questions earlier, he's put in another comment. Sometimes I wonder if self-realization is a prerequisite forward progression. Is this a gasp? Maybe he means grasp at ego survival.
Self-realization is not the most appropriate term. Who is to realize what? That is, ego can never know itself as it actually is, because ego is a false awareness of ourselves. So when we as ego know ourselves as we actually are, we will cease to be ego and remain as we actually are, as we eternally are. So in that state that is called self-realization, in other words, the state in which ego is found to be ever non-existent and we alone are found to be ever existent, there's no progress. Because who is to progress to where? This idea of progress, of some destination ahead in time, is all this exists only in the view of ego. Where can being, what we actually are is Satchit, pure being awareness. Where can that progress? So these are all mental concepts. And mental concepts exist only in the view of ourself as ego. So we need to go to the root of all this. The root of everything is our rising as ego. Let's investigate this ego and go beyond all these ideas of progress. Yes, so long as we rise as ego, there seems to be progression. We are progressing, hopefully, but from our former bad ways to becoming a better, we are progressing to greater purification of mind. We are slowly getting purified by His grace. So in that sense, yes, there's progress. But this progress is all only for ego. When ego ceases to exist, it'll be known there never was any progress. What always is, has always been, and will always be as it is. And there is nothing other than that.
Swami Nivritananda wanted to ask you a question. Swamiji?
Yeah, namaste, Michael ji.
Namaste, namaste.
I would like to ask a question on Bhagavan. Bhagavan has translated some of the Sanskrit verses from the Aruṇācala Mahatmyam into Tamil. And one such verse says, Yojanai Mondra Mittala Vasarako, Asaru Dikshay Yadin Driman, Pasamil Sayudyam Payukume, Ishan Yendran Anayai Nane. That is the verse.
Yes.
So what exactly is Pashamil Sayugyam?
Sayugyam means the state of union with God. Pasam means, pasam is attachment. So Pasamil Sayujyam, that's that state of Sayujya, which is beyond all attachment. So did you have any other questions about that?
Pash, in Shaiva Siddhanta has got a different meaning for Sayujyam. It is living closer to the deity in the world of the deity, but there is a sense of separateness in that Sayujyam.
That is very different. According to some schools, very different forms of liberation. There's Salokya, where you live in the same world as God. There's higher than that is Samipya, where you live close to God. Higher than that is Sarupya, where you actually have the same form of God. So, for example, Jaya and Vijaya in Vaikuntha, they had the form of Vishnu. They were the Dwarapalakas, the gatekeepers of inner sanctum of Vishnu, but they had the same form of Vishnu. They had attained Sarupya Mukti. But then, because they had, I think they prevented the Sanakadi Rishi or someone from coming, then they were cursed and they were born as demons and everything. But so that's called Sarupya. And Sayujya is where you actually join, become one. Yujya means for joining. So when you actually join as together with God, that's called Sayujya. So often the word Sayujya is used in Vedanta for referring to the state of dissolution of ego. That is when ego is dissolved, what remains is God alone. So we are, as Bhagavan said, we become food to him. We are swallowed by him. We dissolve like the salt doll in the ocean. We merge like the river flowing into the ocean. So we lose our separate existence. That is Sayujya.
Now, does it apply to all those who are living in the radius of 3 yojanas for Arunachala, or it applies to sadhakas?
Yes, because he says, Isanam, Endranam, Endru, Isanam, Endran, Arnayanal. By the ordinance, by the order of the order of me who am God. So by my order who am God. So this is Shiva Vak, Shiva Vashanam. So Shiva himself says, by my ordinance they will attain. He doesn't say it may take time for some, because according to the maturity, his grace is working for everyone. But when we are more pure-hearted by his grace, it will happen quicker. So if we're less pure-hearted, it takes more time for his grace to purify us. But it will definitely happen. But here in this verse, he's saying those who live within 3 yojanas. Exactly what a yojana is, people have slightly different things, but it's about 25 to 30 miles. So in that circumference around, whoever lives there will attain that Pasamil Sayujyam by my, and he also says, the asaru diksha, the blemishless diksha. Without that diksha in Śrī Siddhanta and a lot of other bhakti traditions, diksha, initiation, is considered as very, very important. But Bhagavan often used to refer to this verse when people asked about diksha. Here in Tiruvannamalai, no diksha is necessary. That has a symbolic significance. Sometimes when people ask Bhagavan about initiation, he said the very fact that you've come here, the very fact that you're drawn, means you've already been initiated. What more initiation is required? So Bhagavan, for Bhagavan, in Bhagavan's path, no initiation is required. The very fact that we are drawn to this path means that that whatever initiation may have been necessary, it's already been done. So let's not worry about initiation.
One more question.
Yes.
How were the last days of Sadhu Om? What was his state of mind?
He was, to all intents and purposes, to all appearances, he was in perfectly good health. He did have health issues. He had high blood pressure. He used to, people generally refer to blood pressure as BP. He used to say, this BP is the best condition. BP means Bhagavan's protection. So if we have BP, we got Bhagavan's protection. And this, of all diseases, this is the best. One day we'll be here, next day we'll be gone. It won't be any trouble to us, it won't be any trouble to others. But though he used to say that, none of us were, he was just 63. And he was apart from a few problems like this BP, and he also had a stomach ulcer, he seemed to be in very good health. So there were no obvious signs. But 2 years before he left the body, one day some friends were talking about the son of one of them. And they said, he's now studying in +2. And Sadhu Om said, and I'm in -2. At that time, none of us attached any significance to that. We just thought he's joking or something. But only after he left the body 2 years later, then we understood the significance of what he said. And during the last month or so, there was that it wasn't obvious at the time, but in retrospect, afterwards it became clear, he was slowly withdrawing himself. I remember a few things that happened. Just about a month before, there was a young man called Santana Gopal. He was a very quiet-natured person. He was living in Tiruvannamalai, dedicating himself to his own path, or the path he was following. But he used to come to our place to have food. But he very seldom spoke. And when he did speak, he was a very good-natured person. One day, a friend had come to visit him. So they had gone around the hill. And when they came to Nerannamalaya, there's a big tank behind Nerannamalaya. So he had gone there for a swim. And somehow he got caught in the weeds there and he passed away. And I went for Giri Pradakshina that same day, and I came there maybe an hour or so later, and his friend was panicking of what had happened to him and everything. But it turned out he had passed away. I remember Sadhu Om was saying, often after that, we will never see him again. We will never see him again. Yeah, it was an unusual thing for him to say, but afterwards I felt there was some significance in what he was saying about that. Also, just a few weeks before, there was in a nearby village, maybe about 10-15 miles from Tiruvannamalai, there was a village called Karangalikupam. There was, in that village, the village school headmaster was a very good devotee of Bhagavan, but he had some problems with all his limbs he had a problem with. So he had difficulty walking, and slowly his condition was a degenerating condition. So he used to come generally for Deepam and for other times. I think for Shivaratri or something, he wasn't able to come. So Sadhu Om suddenly said one day, this is our last opportunity to see him. We won't be able to see him again. So let us go and see him. I took that to mean that Sadhu Om felt that this Karangali Kupam headmaster was, I don't even remember his name. We always just used to call him Karangali Kupam headmaster. I think it was Venkatesh something. I can't remember his name. Anyway, Sadhu Om suddenly said, let's go and see him. Let's go and meet him. This will be our last opportunity to see him. So Sadhu Om and I and one other friend, Ramana, the three of us caught a bus, we caught the bus going towards Chennai, got down at the nearby place, and then from there you have to walk to the village. So we got down and we walked there and we went there, and he was so overwhelmed with gratitude to Sadhu Om for coming there, and we met him and everything. And as I say, we were thinking when Sadhu Om said this will be our last opportunity to see him, we were thinking maybe his condition is that Karangali Kupam headmaster's condition is degenerating, so Sadhu Om knows that he won't be able to come again. Little did we expect that it was Sadhu Om who knew that he must have known that his time was coming. So because this Karangali Kupam headmaster, he was such a nice, I mean, he used to come even in Bhagavan's time. He had seen Bhagavan from his early childhood, and he was so devoted and such a nice, gentle soul. Though he was a headmaster of a small village school, he once got an All India award for being the best village school headmaster in the whole of India. And he was asked to come to Delhi to receive the award, but because of his physical condition, he wasn't able to go. So, I mean, he was such a nice, really, really nice person. So, and Sadhu Om was very, very fond of him because he knew how deep his devotion was. So of his own accord, he went to meet him. And I remember after Sadhu Om left the body, this Karangali Kupam headmaster came there and he was shedding tears, saying how gracious he was, but he came, that he must have known that his time was coming, and so he came all that way to see me, thinking knowing that I wouldn't be coming to see him again. So things like that happen. And the last thing that happened on it was the first of the Tamil month. And we, as usual, we went round the hill with Sadhu Om. That day, he was unusually withdrawn because we used to, while going round the hill, we used to sing all of Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam Panchakam. And I would always be questioning him, asking him this or that, something about Bhagavan's teachings. That day when I was questioning him, he was just giving very brief answers. So it was as if he just wanted to be quiet. So sensing that, I just kept quiet, and we quietly came round the hill. We came back, we had food as usual. And then I was the last person who spoke with him because I was upstairs in his room. And then I took leave of him to go down to my house to go to bed, and he also was going to bed. Early the next morning, I was woken up, and I was told that he had had he seemed to have had a paralytic attack. So I went upstairs, and we all gathered around, and he was. He seemed to be just. I mean, from our point of view, he looked like he was unconscious. So we called a local doctor, not even a fully qualified doctor. He was a compounder who used to treat village people and everything, but he was a nice person and we knew him well. So he was the nearest person, so we called him, and he came and he said, oh, this needs to be you should call Dr. Sobrian, because this is, I can't do anything for this. And so we sent word to Dr. Sobrian, who was a doctor in the town, and he said, you need to take him to, he didn't even come see him. He said, you need to take him to Pondicherry as soon as possible. They're the only people who can treat him in this condition. So we hired a taxi and we took him to Pondicherry. And they admitted him in the hospital. And I remember all that night I stayed awake, or just for a very brief time. I just slept on the floor there, and there were a number of us there. There were, I think, myself, another friend called Srinivasan, Mrs. Sipinath, and just some 3 or 4 of us were there. And then the next morning, there was a doctor who was also a close friend, and he was also a devoted Bhagavan, but he was a native of Pondicherry. He was, I think his name, Dr. Balabhaskaran, I think his name was. He came there and he spoke to the doctors and everything. And then he told us, the doctors say his condition, because he had a brain hemorrhage, that's what had happened. And they said, there's no hope for his survival, but we'll keep him here and take care of him. So then we asked Dr. Bhaskaran, does that mean that he's not going to survive? He said, no, there's no chance, but let him be here. At least they'll be able to keep him alive for a few more weeks. But then we said, no, Sadhu Om always said, if ever he's sick, if ever he's critically ill, not to take him away from Tiruvannamalai. So we said his wish was to leave the body in Tiruvannamalai. So we decided that we'd bring him back to Tiruvannamalai. And Dr. Bhaskaran advised us, no, better to keep him here. At least here they'll be able to take care of him. But we said, what's the point? His wish was to be in Tiruvannamalai till the very end. So we brought him back. And when we came back, myself and my friend Srinivasan, we went to meet Dr. Sobrian to ask for his advice, because they had given us drip bottles and everything so that we could put drip. Then Dr. Sobrian said, my advice in such situation is to stop all drip, stop everything. There's no point. Even if you give drip, you may extend the life a little longer. That's not what Swami would want. And it's not what we should want for him. His time has come. Let him go. He's always with Bhagavan, so let him be with Bhagavan, he said. So only then I realized that there's absolutely no hope at all. So we came back, we removed the drip and everything. When we brought him back, instead of taking him upstairs to where he lived, in my house, which was just a ground floor house, we put a bed just in front of the door, and we laid his body there, so in view of Aruṇācala. And then all that night, we were sitting with him, singing Aksharamlai and everything. And then early the next morning, that is during the night, his breathing pattern was changing. But while we were singing Aksharamlai, that we had sung it several times before, but one of the times when we were singing Aksharamlai, when it looked like the end was nearing, when we sang Pain Godiyanan Patrindrivadamal Patrukodaika Aruṇācala, that is, so that I may not be like a creeper without a patrakoda, without a stick to support it. You be my stick. It's Bhagavan prayer to Aruṇācala. As we were singing that verse, he breathed in and then the breathing stopped. Usually, if you ever watched a person dying, the last breath will be a breathing out. But in his case, the last breath he breathed in, that apparently has some significance. But it is said the prana of an ordinary jiva will leave the body at the time of death. But the prana of the jnani merges back into the body. I don't know about all these things, but that's what people say. But anyway, I clearly noticed that, but his last breath was he breathed in, and that was it. Then that was the last breath. So it all happened very, very one evening we went round the hill. He had cerebral hemorrhage that evening. Then we took him to Pondicherry. He spent that night in the hospital. The next day we brought him back, and on the third day he left the body.
Wonderful. Very touching.
At that time, I was absolutely devastated because I never expected it was going to happen so soon, and I just felt like an orphan because but slowly, Bhagavan showed Bhagavan showed that things happen as they're meant to happen.
So
when a small
have,
tree is planted, we put a stake and we support it. But a time comes when you have to remove the stake and leave the tree on its own. So in retrospect, I feel like Bhagavan gave me that support. For 8.5 years, I was with Sadhu Om. But a time came when Bhagavan wanted to remove that support. Bhagavan has his own way of doing things.
So for a couple of months, you might have missed him a lot.
Yeah, I can't just say a couple of months. It was for a long, I mean, slowly, I began to understand that I knew whatever happens is Bhagavan's will, but it became clear to me that this was what was meant to be. And slowly, I started to find, whereas previously, whenever I had a question, I would ask him. And I used to question him relentlessly. And whatever answer he gave, I would cross-question him, and I'd try to understand more and more deeply. So when he was no longer there for me to question, at first I felt lost. And then slowly, Bhagavan made it clear to me that I don't have to ask outwardly, but all the answers Bhagavan gives from within. So everything happens as it's meant to happen.
Yeah.
That's why I said, just like a small tree sapling, at first it needs the support, but a time comes where you have to remove the support in order for that tree sapling to grow strong.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much, Michael Ji. Thank you so much for answering all my questions so patiently.
Okay, the email you sent is a very, very good question. I want to take time to reply to it, so please bear with me if I don't reply immediately.
Sure, Michael.
Because it's a it's a very important point you're asking about, and it's something that requires clarification. So I was even thinking, if I write a reply to that, I can later make that into an article for my blog, because it's a very important. It's related to many important things. So I will reply to it, but I will take my time.
Oh, please. Sure, Michael Ji. Sure.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Right, you're most welcome.
Thank you. Aruṇācala, Namo Ramanaya.
Namo Ramanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala Ramanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala Ramanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala Ramanaya.